Hello and welcome to all our viewers today on our live stream from CEDA on leveraging technology for recovery. And using technology today, of course, you might be sitting there in your pajamas eating some cereal, you might be dealing with some children in the background with some homeschooling, or indeed you might have a couple of pets walking up and down on your keyboard at the moment. I won't know, neither will our audience for today, but my name is Colin, Dominish, and I'm the Australian Digital Leader for GHD Digital. And wherever you are in the world today, I hope you're safe and well, and I really do thank you for taking the time to join what is a fantastic panel for discussion today on that topic of leveraging technology for recovery. I'd like to acknowledge GHD Digital as a sponsor today. We are proud sponsors of CEDA, and I'm a trustee of CEDA, very proudly as well, have been for many years. So great that we can support CEDA in this live stream event, and I hope that you're getting great value from it as we go through the discussion today. We've brought a fantastic panel of speakers for you, starting with Lucinda Longcroft, who's the Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy at Google. Welcome, Lucinda. Great to have you with us. We have Ben Morley-John, the Managing Director of Smash Delta. Ben, great that you could make it along today. And Dr. Ian Oppermann, the New South Wales Chief Data Scientist and also Industry Professor at the University of Technology in Sydney. A warm welcome to you as well, Ian. So I want to remind viewers that we are on Twitter today, and you can follow CEDA on Twitter at CEDA_news. We will be tweeting from today's event, so please join that conversation, and the hashtag is COVID-19 Tech. Also, if you've got a question for our speakers today, you can take advantage of the Pigeonhole app, where you can log in at ceda.pigeonhole.at with the passcode of technology. And we will be having a poll a little bit later today where you can cast your vote, and I'll be providing results on that poll towards the end of the discussion. So many ways that you can join in from a multi-channel type process today so that you can participate, given that we can't be together in a physical sense, but virtually we do want your participation today in the discussion. So how is technology being leveraged for recovery at the moment, and what can we do as we're starting to move past the COVID-19 crisis to take advantage of that? Well, across the globe, working dynamics are quickly evolving. Many organisations trying to navigate through unfolding business complexities. And how does technology play a role in determining the next course of action is something that I feel every organisation has grappled with over the past few months and are certainly looking to take advantage of in the foreseeable future. Our expert panel today will discuss how technology is being leveraged to inform, monitor and evaluate our collective response to crisis management and the public's acceptance of technology-led solutions. It's been quite a change for people to stomach, and yet so much has happened in such a short period of time. Faced with unprecedented challenges posed by COVID-19, institutions are leveraging technology and data analytics to help them respond to the pandemic and adapt for the future. Technology allows policymakers, service providers to reduce their risk, measure outcomes and plan for the recovery that we're now undertaking. However, the success of technology solutions and data-driven insights does also rely on the public's willingness to trust institutions, to collect data on them, to use that data for the public good. And we want to explore that topic with our speakers a little today as well. For many, our focus has shifted in recent weeks to be considering how we can be resilient, how we can bounce back from what we've just experienced over the past few months. And I know through a lot of clients I'm working with, they're looking at how can they reduce operating costs, tighten budgets, connect to their customers in new ways to improve their service and their experience, make better decisions using data to support what's happening in their organisation operationally, environmentally, or for community service. All of these things require another look at how technology might make a difference. There's certainly a lot of talk about how to maximise workforce performance and productivity when they're no longer in an office and they can work from literally anywhere on the world. But if they do decide to come back into the office like I have today, how do they do that effectively, and how can technology take them on the next level of performance from where they were before they left a few months ago? So developing plans for a new way of working is important, and data and technology is essential for understanding how to go on that journey. And our speakers will be covering a number of things in that regard for you today. In recent months, there's been clear challenges to the traditional approach to organisational management, and we've seen things like manual processes where any physical presence is required, very difficult to perform. We've seen the challenge of connecting people within our organisations to other people and to tasks that they need to perform. Much harder to do to be able to train people because they don't have that support mechanism of people around them. We've seen manual training and face-to-face learning go by the wayside, and that's had a massive impact on many organisations and indeed our schools and our universities. Anything requiring any manual signatures, any approvals, are very frustrating to action at the minute unless you've got the technology in place to assist. And we're actually seeing resource shortages in certain areas where that technology isn't able to help them put in place ways of leveraging what would have otherwise been physical labour. And so resource shortages are coming out as being a significant challenge for people to counter through technology as well. So in response, organisations are quickly looking for ways to adapt to the future of work right here and now, so they can bounce back for a brighter future as we come out of the COVID-19 situation. Digital transformation over the last few months has occurred almost on the fly, and people have stood up some very quick solutions so they can be resilient and prepare for a new way of operating. Change has come very quickly, and I'd say very effectively in most quarters. We've seen most organisations have been able to address that really well. So here we are getting prepared to get back to a new normal. The change that we've been through has meant that our new 9 to 5 is going to be a very different experience. How entire industries function are up for change as well. That really is the situation that people have had to reconsider how they go about doing every task along the way. And digital technology can help continue that transformation of the workforce as we move forward over the coming weeks and months. In recent weeks, I've had the pleasure to work with a number of our clients in GHD Digital just to solve some really interesting problems that have come up just because of the nature of having to work remotely. Virtually connecting employees to their infrastructure assets is something that we've done a lot of in recent weeks using all manner of technologies, drones, cameras, etc., to see what's actually happening out in the field for that infrastructure while they're homebound. A lot of remote planning on how new construction might occur across Australia and what we can do to look at that construction from a virtual means before we go and do it out physically in the field. Helping clients with training. I mentioned earlier that it's impossible to do the face-to-face learning in quite the same way, and organisations have had to move to online training mechanisms. We've been helping a lot with that. Visualising and modelling what the future might look like from a digital perspective, because you can't do that in a physical means. Removing a lot of low-value repetitive work that might have been a very manual task and replacing it with automation, and seeing how we can use technology to digitalise activity that might have existed before in a human form. Remote site and asset inspections has been a large part of our work before the COVID crisis, but in recent weeks there's been a lot of new ways of doing that right around the world. And of course, we've been helping clients around their contact tracing and social distancing, and we're working with large firms around the world like Ford and Toyota in the car manufacturing business Dawn Foods in the food manufacturing business to look at how they can keep their manufacturing staff safe out on site as well. So being resilient within GHD Digital and knowing that we need to recover has been very important for us as a company, and something that we're very proud to be able to talk a little bit about with you today, because we know that as we move out of this COVID-19 situation, it's made us all think that little bit different about how technology can help us recover faster. And I feel it's actually going to make us more agile, more collaborative, and actually help transform society for good as we come to a new way of living. So as I mentioned, great to have you with us. Great to have some fantastic speakers with us to take you through a bit of detail on how they're leveraging technology in their clients as well. And to that end, can I please hand over to Lucinda Longcroft, Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy at Google. Thanks, Lucinda.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you also to CEDA for inviting Google and me to be here today. And greetings to all the remote viewers online. I think, Colin, you touched on so many of the key issues that are core and commonly shared by many of us and all of us working in Australia. Key to that is, I think, but for technology, the situation we would be in now would be a great deal more difficult and challenging for all. And at core, Google itself, Google Australia's operations, is about helping the Australian community, the Australian government, and about protecting the people who use our platforms. So today, in the time allotted to me, I'd like to briefly introduce myself. I won't have a chance to get to know many of our remote viewers, but look forward to the interactive discussions towards the end. And then to look at a bit about what Google is doing to lean in and support the Australian community, leveraging technology at this critical time. Briefly about myself, I'm an Australian, born and bred, spent the last 22 years in Switzerland and New York, working at the global level with the United Nations on innovation and technology for economic development. So very proud to be back in Australia. Of course, having arrived only in November last year, I was introduced to a wonderful team at Google that is based in Australia and New Zealand, and obviously then working digitally, but very quickly, of course, pivoted to a crisis situation when the bushfires first affected the Australian community. And that immediately changed our priorities. A global focus came onto Australia in the context of the bushfires, and the importance of having been crisis tested through that bushfire environment became quickly evident for us as we went into a COVID-19 environment. So like all viewers, and as you alluded, Colin, in your introduction, we are all affected both in our working environments and in our home environments. You may well hear a dog barking in the background, guarding the house here at home. My children are thankfully back at school this week. But we're very conscious as a technology company of the human impact of the COVID-19 crisis and of the impact it has both on our partners and on the users who depend upon our technology and platforms. And so many of our responses are focused on that human impact and our commitment to our users to make available the world's information in a way which is most useful. In terms of the technology and the role of technology in this crisis, it is clear that if we had had this pandemic some 10 years ago, we would be facing a very different situation. Without the modern digital infrastructure that we now take advantage of and the remote working tools, the impact of this crisis on our economic impact in Australia, output in Australia, would have been far more severe. Of course, even in light of that transformation that Colin, you mentioned, and that has been accelerated at this time of the epidemic, many organisations within Australia have struggled with a lack of progress in economic digitisation. The COVID-19 crisis, with this long period of enforced isolation, has driven consumers to adopt digital spending habits, largely benefiting those organisations that have already invested in digital capacity and business models that were rapidly able to adapt. However, prior to this crisis, we are very aware, and a study that was widely circulated by Alpha Beta for Google in 2017 showed that Australia's publicly listed companies were investing in productivity-enhancing technology at rates that were only 64% of the rate of our peer nation average, less than 50% of publicly listed companies in the United States. Indeed, a subsequent study by CSIRO's Data61 showed that from 2000 to 2018, Australia was capturing the benefits of digitisation through digital investment at a rate 34% below that of Australia's advanced economy peers. This crisis has definitely demonstrated the importance and benefit of digitisation from economic resilience. Thankfully, our government has based its response on sound public health advice and evidence. If that were not the case, given those statistics and Australia's backward situation with regard to digitisation, the economic impact of this crisis would have been far more profound. So, as you can see, Google is definitely encouraging a process of digital acceleration and of digitisation of the economy in Australia. We are making efforts to support the Australian community in this regard, primarily and very importantly to us through access to reliable information. Of course, with all of Australians relying on smartphones and digital access to gather information and entertainment and other forms of connection to their loved ones, the persistence of consistent and reliable information is critically important. During this entire COVID crisis, Google has been working with the Australian government at federal and state levels to highlight the latest health information, particularly at federal levels with the Department of Health, and to ensure that when Australians search for COVID-related information, they are being directed to the government's authoritative sources of information. Commensurately, we are taking down thousands of YouTube videos that feature dangerous or misleading information about the coronavirus. And we will continue to remove videos that promote medically unproven methods or otherwise mislead the Australian public in this critical health response. We have, to the government, provided critically important information on trends in search. It may be of interest that it was a Google trend demonstrating a significant spike in searches related to domestic violence that led and contributed to the government's significant increase in support for domestic violence-related policy. We also provided mobility reports to the government and to the Australian public, demonstrating how Australians are reacting during the crisis and demonstrating how economic recovery might be best supported as the crisis continues. We're also working in a global first with Apple and with governments around the world on exposure notification or contact tracing technologies, and recently released a Google and Apple API to support privacy-protected contact tracing apps globally. As I mentioned, we have pivoted from one crisis at the beginning of the year, which dramatically affected the Australian community and economy in the bushfires. And during the bushfires, we worked with the fire and emergency services in all states and territories of Australia to ensure that a crisis map was available to inform people of current bushfire locations, as well as alert levels so that they could take reasonable and necessary precautions. Secondly, I think a resilient infrastructure and platforms are critically important to Google. Digital resilience is a theme that's going to come up time and again when looking back at what did and didn't work during this crisis and how we can better prepare for the future. People often go online and test whether the internet is working by putting in a google.com search. And that's because we do try and set a standard for reliability. We've invested deeply in global telecommunications infrastructure, our computational capacity, and computer science disciplines of site reliability engineering to ensure that our digital systems are resilient even under the greatest pressures of local use during COVID-19. In fact, during COVID-19 within Australia, despite the increased load on our networks driven by people telecommuting, accessing entertainment and other information and education through the networks, people were still reliably able to access digital services, and this is critically important to us. In fact, Google engineers worked around the clock at the start of this crisis to ensure that when it comes to our systems and infrastructure, we're keeping people's lives from being further disrupted. Further, Google also is supporting economic activity in Australia. Many people experience Google as a place where they find information, YouTube as a place for entertainment, but our business is also serving as a type of shopfront for many small and medium-sized enterprises around Australia. We help businesses reach their customers to support their core digital systems and infrastructure through cloud and support tens of billions of dollars of economic activity around the Australian economy. Small businesses in particular are the heart of the Australian economy, and they are most impacted, first by the bushfires and now by COVID-19. And we are doing everything that Google Australia can to help mitigate the impact of this crisis on small businesses. We're training businesses and transitioning to a digital training platform, providing them with cloud-based tools that enable their employees to work remotely. We've launched a free website to help businesses to access tools, and working with the Business Council of Australia, ACCI and COSBO to share these resources. And we've made the premium version of our video conferencing software, Google Meets, free to all Australian and global G Suite customers till September of this year to allow live meetings, live streams and recordings to take place. We look at making direct contributions where the Australian community and government need them most. We saw the devastating impact of bushfires and other crises in recent months, and people are asking us how we can better prepare and foresee and respond to these crises in the future. We're using technology to build future preparedness and long-term resilience to bushfires and other crises, and are working with the National Bushfire Recovery Agency on ways to leverage technologies to help communities become more resilient in future years, and looking closely at ways in which we can work with government, researchers, non-profits and community groups to support projects that use emerging technology, particularly artificial intelligence, to help with crisis response, preparedness and resilience. Finally, the crisis that Australia has faced has brought home to us, and I think to the broader Australian community, the importance of technology in ensuring that modern economies can respond effectively to the crisis, ensure that we are well informed and maintain our business continuity. We now need to focus on how digitisation can help Australia rebuild and remain competitive as economically important sectors like tourism and education feel the long-term impact of a world where travel is restricted for the foreseeable future. We've also seen the importance of evidence-based decision-making in ensuring that Australia can respond effectively in a health crisis. We hope this evidence-based approach can be extended to other areas of public policy decision-making, particularly in the technology sector, to support a confident and certain technology industry in Australia. Australia has in the past been held back by policymaking driven more by political pressure than facts. As much as our tools and technology matter, we at Google do see that it is indeed people coming together to protect and support one another during the crisis that has allowed us to weather both bushfires and now COVID-19 as a community. And we at Google Australia can be relied upon to continue to contribute and support that community going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, CEDA, for having me along. I'm delivering this address on Gadigal land and would like to acknowledge the peoples of the Eora Nation. Also, as there will be those of you tuning in from across the country, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this live stream. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Well, it's great to have the opportunity to talk to you today and to share some of our ideas for how Australia can leverage technology, partner with the public and be better placed to manage the current crisis and also be set up to tackle the next one. But before we dive in, I want to set up our frame of reference. Everyone comes to these discussions with their own experiences and incentives and points of view. And so I want to illuminate where Smash Delta is coming from. We've spent the past several years collaborating and working alongside major organizations such as banks, telcos, media organizations, as they've sought to jump further into the analytics and AI space. and leverage what we call behavioral data. That's data that reflects choices, transactions, and movements of entire economies in real time. We've also worked with several government departments as they have sought to increase their ability to understand data and AI to build better cities and better serve their communities. And throughout that experience, we've landed on a critical truth. That is, data and AI belongs to all Australians. And we in government and industry are holding ourselves back if we don't partner with the public, educate, empower, and make them equal owners of the transformation that's taking place across this country. So that's our frame of reference for the discussion today. So diving into COVID-19, we know Australia has done a stellar job of socially distancing and arresting the spread. And what comes next is the interesting part, which is how do we bring business, recreation, and society back without setting off another wave, losing all the momentum we've made? And even more importantly, how do we build the smarts so that when the next pandemic comes, we don't suffer the health, economic, and social hits that we have this time? So the solution lies in generating a new capability driven by data. That is using rich behavioral data inputted into advanced analytical processes to get a much more granular and geospatial view of the virus spread to better assess risk and respond with a scalpel, not a hammer. So right now, countries the world over are trialing a range of approaches in using data to fight COVID-19. At one end of the spectrum, countries like Sweden have taken a less aggressive, non-interventionist approach to managing the virus, while at the other hand, or at the other end of the spectrum, countries like China have had a lot of success managing the virus, but they've done so collecting data from systems that can be quite invasive to privacy, such as facial recognition and mandated use of tracing apps tied to an individual's identity and actually governing their freedom of movement. Australia sits in the middle of the spectrum with some person-level data being collected by the new COVID-Safe app, which aids the contact tracing process, but it doesn't necessarily help us manage outbreaks at a broader scale. So looking to examples like Sweden and China, Australians might think that we have to choose between better management of the virus while losing our privacy, or settling for worse COVID outcomes in order to retain our privacy. But this is a false choice, which brings us to the other critical piece of how this capability is actually created and delivered. And this must be in true partnership with the public. That is providing a never before seen level of transparency in how this process is being created, what data it is using, how it's influencing the choices of the government in the pandemic management. And I'll dive into what this looks like in more detail in a moment. But if we can deliver this, the prize is not only more effectively managing the virus now, it's being able to communicate to the world that we as Australians are ready with a publicly understood and trusted data-driven solution to the next pandemic. I will leave it to economists to deduce what would happen to the level of foreign investment if it became accepted that Australia had created the leading long-term pandemic management system of any Western democracy, but I suspect the upside economic benefits would be substantial. So how would all this work? A starting point is leveraging rich but aggregated behavioral data to get a better sense of both movement and activity, not of individuals, but of large-scale groups. Some example data sets that exist today and can support this include device movement from cell networks, geotagged transactions from payment networks, and transit behaviors, be it from public transport networks or rideshare. Let's take a look at how this could work in an actual example. So just very quickly setting up some technical vocabulary. A key metric for judging the effectiveness of containment measures in a given area is the effective reproduction rate, or R0. So it's interpreted as the average number of infections deriving from an individual. If this number exceeds 1, the number of infections increases over time and a pandemic is sustained. Otherwise, it dies out. So tracking this reproduction rate will play a key role in assessing the effectiveness of current interventions and planning future ones. Right now, spread analysis often only has access to infection data for large geospatial areas, like a suburb in a city, for instance. And apart from some incidental contact tracing information, it's difficult to get an evidence-based view of where infections could be occurring at a higher rate. Also, due to the relatively long incubation times of the coronavirus, our understanding of virus spread can lag behind the reality by several days. The combination of these factors means we may not know the impact of lifting certain restrictions until it's too late, and we have another widespread outbreak, resulting in us going back to full lockdowns, or worse, losing control of the virus entirely. By contrast, a near real-time data-driven understanding of how people are moving, staying, interacting in current locations would enable us to get an estimate of current risk levels, represented here by the R0s in various areas. This could be achieved through a range of analytical models, such as spatially aware compartment models, machine learning models, and more granular agent-based simulations, but all driven from actual behavioral data. This capability would be leveraged to minimize the effects of an outbreak in a particular area of the city, such as Bondi, for instance. And then models enhanced with these new data assets could trigger a red flag in locations that saw high levels of people inflows from the original outbreak area, particularly if those locations saw large amounts of dwell time. For instance, people heading to a restaurant area at Bondi Junction after having come from a high infection area. Locally targeted infections would be put in place, anticipating the emergence of new cases. Those infections would be aimed at reducing movement into areas of dense population such as the city, reducing interactions between people to limit the spread, and driving a greater availability of health, financial, and tracing resources in areas where they're most needed. These interventions essentially act like cooling rods in a nuclear reactor, containing the risk within certain small areas and preventing a further wide-scale outbreak. Even more so, they allow resources to be allocated where they're needed, while restrictions on life, business, society can be lifted elsewhere. Going beyond this, the application of more sophisticated machine learning and artificial intelligence models with more data could be used to discover thematic connections that we might never have imagined, linking specific exacerbating risk factors associated with movement and activity. This could power an even richer understanding of how the virus thrives in relation to our activities and what else we can be doing to protect our people. And while there's some great potential here, we need to put a check on how AI could be used. A crucial balance will need to be struck between the complexity of what's being created, how explainable it is, how effectively it can be verified and validated too, in the context of transparency and public partnership. It's really important that we don't find ourselves in a position where people's freedoms are being impacted by outputs from a black box. So you can see we're big believers in the potential of where this capability could take us. And this is merely a taste of the use cases that could be developed. But I want to come back to this idea of partnership. So what does that even mean in this context? At its core, the idea of partnership acknowledges that technical capability is relatively useless, in the Australian context at least, if it isn't trusted and understood by the public. So that's why we strongly believe that building this capability needs to be underpinned by, one, protection of privacy rights, using only the data that is needed and addressing re-identification risks. Two, transparency, that is not creating behind closed doors, but revealing what capability is being built and what data it actually uses. Three, education, so taking the time to work with the public to better understand how the capability actually works. And four, accountability. This means setting up clear checks and balances for the use of data, leveraging the great start achieved by the accountability mechanisms created for the COVID Safe app. So leveraging technology and data to build the world-leading system for managing COVID-19 and whatever comes next is achievable. We have all the tools we need right here in Australia, and we owe it to everyone to get going and to give it our very best shot. So thanks for listening, and I now invite Ian Oppermann to provide some remarks. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. I'd also like to add my acknowledgement to the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm at least standing today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And it's a really interesting presentation that Ben gave about the use of data. And for those of you that I have met before, you'll know that I've been working on data sharing frameworks for quite some time. And if I can, there we go. What I thought I'd do is just very quickly give you an update on some of the data sharing work that's happened during COVID. Not all of it, of course, but it has been really quite an amazing response in New South Wales. The response to help inform the health response. So the primary reaction, the primary response, of course, to COVID is a health-driven activity. I want to give a shout out to the folks from New South Wales Health for the amazing job that they've done. The work behind the scenes has been to try and help inform the data for improving models, but also the data to understand what's going on the ground, what's happening in terms of various areas of vulnerable communities, thinking through the economic impact and thinking through a range of different situational awareness, prioritization insights, which are driven by data. And New South Wales has been on a data-driven journey for quite some time under the auspices principally of Minister Dominish and the Premier. But we took an incredible leap forward over the last couple of months. And that little map on the screen there is the COVID-19 data, which gets released every day. No longer on the weekends, I'm happy to say, but it gets released every day. And I'll tell you why I'm happy at the moment. And it shows by postcode, and in some cases by LGA and by LHD, where the cases are and where the testing has taken place. Over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, the Data Analytics Centre has been looking at the challenge of linking data sets together in aid of addressing wicked policy challenges. And the concern always is, even if de-identified, even if you're using the gold standards, how do you ensure that you have data which doesn't cross that threshold identifiable? And it turns out to be an extraordinarily difficult challenge. Over the course of 4.5 years, we've looked at problems related to transport optimisation, to compulsory third-party insurance reform, to domestic and family violence, to out-of-home care. And the concern is always that if you link enough data sets together, at some point, you will get, if people-centric data, you will get to the point where someone is reasonably re-identifiable. Eye colour, hair colour, shoe size are actually all personal information, but it's really difficult to say it's John Smith if you've got those 3 parameters. But if you start to link hundreds of data sets together, the concern is that someone will become reasonably identifiable and you'll cross from having personal information to personally identifiable information and put you into the wrong side of privacy legislation, or needing to build much, much more significant frameworks and governance around. So we've been working on this concept of a personal information factor through New South Wales government, working actually collaboratively with many other state and territory governments and with a lot of different technical, legal and other institutions, as well as individuals under the banner of the Australian Computer Society, trying to work out whether or not we could actually really identify a personal information factor and develop safeguards around it. And of course, the challenge always is how you use the data is what makes the difference. The context makes the difference. So we simplified all the complexity down to 3 broad categories: closed environment, an environment where it's restricted who gets to see the data and who gets to see the insights, and then when you release to the outside world as open data. And there has been an increasingly strong push for open data in all governments around the world, and in particular during this COVID-19 response, the emphasis in New South Wales was to put out as much useful data in the public interest as possible. And so slowly but surely over the course of the last 3.5 years, we've been working through data sharing frameworks which acknowledge that some data, some people-centric data, has more personal information than others. You link lots of data sets together, and working through this concept of could we measure it? If we could measure it, how could we build governance frameworks? But also thinking through the inherent sensitivity of data. And inherent sensitivity of data relates to the subject itself. Is this data about vulnerable people? Is this data about children? Is it data about minorities? As well as sensitivities associated with how that data is going to be used. Will this insight be used for an automated decision? Will it go into an AI? Will it go into an informed decision-making process, or will it help to inform human beings who will sit and discuss how much context is needed? Is the result going to be very surprising? Is the result going to be something which could potentially lead to harms? Are those harms reversible? Are those harms irreversible? Are those harms reversible with some cost? So believe it or not, over the course, not only working with the Australian Computer Society, we've been working with the international standards community to try and work out what frameworks exist already for privacy preserving data sharing, or understanding where you sit, and working out whether we could genuinely map out inherent sensitivities, which in the standards world speak to issues of quality, issues of provenance, issues associated with the metadata that you need to determine whether or not this data set is appropriate quality for this particular algorithm. And if it is, how far should you go with that use of that insight? Slowly but surely stepping our way through this. And we've been building frameworks to sit on top of those meta standards to try and think through how we would appropriately build frameworks which allow us to deal with data which has a high personal information factor and is quite sensitive. So that's the sort of data we think about when dealing with domestic and family violence or children at risk of harm, or in fact deal with data sets which are actually not that sensitive but have personal information in them, such as Opal card data, tap on, tap off. What are the protections you need to put in place to ensure that you're doing the right thing in terms of not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of privacy legislation, but also ensuring that you still keep the data as valuable as possible when you use it and release it. Or data sets which are, in fact, have relatively low personal information, but can be quite sensitive. And for example, infrastructure planning data can be very sensitive. It has a commercial sensitivity, it has a whole range of other sensitivities. It doesn't really have a lot of personal information. Or to work out what we need to do to build the protections or put the governance in place in order to put open data out. We want to dial down the amount of personal information. We also want to dial down the sensitivity. Now, we've been slowly but surely working with different parts of government, with transport and with other groups inside New South Wales and with Commonwealth agencies, building these frameworks, and then COVID came along. And so we very rapidly accelerated our processes of thinking through how we would map that personal information factor. There was more than 3.5 years work and a lot of collaborative engagement, but also thinking through, in a crisis, where do we put those sensitivity thresholds so that we would release data with a certain level of personal information under normal circumstances versus what we would do under crisis circumstances in the public interest. And I promised that around about lunchtime, the best thing you can do is throw an equation into a presentation. So I thought I'd do that just to cheer you up a little bit. The thing that we've been working on for the last 3.5 years has manifested eventually into an equation which describes the amount of information you gain if you know someone is in the data set. That's the worst case scenario. You know which row they are in that data set, and you learn all this information about them by looking at the data set compared to what you thought you knew about them. This work has actually been published every year under the banner of the Australian Computer Society. We've put out a technical white paper. This equation got described in last year's technical white paper, and there's a few other papers coming out about it. But we've been using it experimentally over the last 1.5 years, and then we started using it really in anger when thinking about what we needed to do to release data to the outside world, where you effectively have no control over further on use of that, and also effectively no control over which other data sets people will try to relink. And we've been looking at what we can do to ensure that we get data out. And this is an example of a data table that we've been releasing every single day. We used to release also on Saturdays and Sundays, which meant we ran the tools on Saturdays and Sundays, and we stopped doing that a couple of weeks ago as the case numbers came down. But what we looked at was how much information would be released if we put out the raw data sets, which contain the postcode, the notification date, the age, the likely source of infection, versus how much information you would gain if we deliberately identified those stronger signals of personal information and started to break tables apart. So every single day we've been running this tool over our COVID data and looking to see what we can do to release or reduce the amount of personal information below a threshold where we believe we're absolutely on the right side of that reasonable likelihood of re-identification. And just as a simple example, this is the curve representing the total information gain you would get for all the different data sets, that all the different rows, all the different individual cases that we would release if we released the raw data every single day. And the number we care about is the highest number, the most sensitive individual, the one that has the most risk when we identified it. That's typically the rarest combination of events. And so what we did was we broke the tables apart, and we produced subsets which allowed us to consider a reduction in this number by a pretty substantial amount to get down to our table 1, which is postcode and notification date, table 2 and table 3, which are likely source of infection and age group. And then at some point we did two things. We recombined one of the tables to actually put more information out there in terms of linked de-identified information. But we stopped releasing one other table, contemplating the entire set of data that was out there in the ecosystem and thinking about that risk of re-identification and the information gain. So the point of taking you down that little pathway is that we've been working on building frameworks for appropriate release of data, for open data, for a very long time. New South Wales has been pushing out open data through data.New South Wales for a very long time. And in a situation of crisis, the need to increase transparency, to help people understand what was going on in their community, to speak to the public interest, was absolutely driven by the need to put data out. We've been using a lot of data inside New South Wales government to understand what's going on, to improve situational awareness and to help prioritise. But the need to push data out into the public so people could see what was going on has also been absolutely essential. And sorry to throw an equation at you, but the good news is that we've been working with lots of governments and lots of standards bodies and lots of technical folks and lots of legal folks to try and make sure that this stuff that goes out is not only safe, but it's also very much in the public interest and is useful. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So for those of you who are still with us, it sounds like we've lost Colin. So you've got Lucinda, Ian, and I left to host ourselves through the rest of this live stream. And so some questions are coming through to me now. Here's a question for the group. How real do you think most digital transformations, in air quotes, have been? Are they skin deep, or have they actually changed the way organizations work? How has that changed with COVID-19? Oh, that's a good one. Does anyone want to jump in on that?
I can jump in on a quick one on that, which I think is extraordinary, in that our small and medium-sized businesses have made real radical leaps forward in transformation. I think we saw an 80% uptick in accessing Google's online trainings for small and medium-sized businesses as COVID-19 impacted. And that is critical. And this is the backbone of Australia's economy. And these are the operations that effectively need to digitise to reach the new markets that are possible and made possible through this digitised economy. So that we don't see as being a reversing trend. What it's done is accelerate. And what we are looking forward to is government putting in place the regulatory certainty and surety that allows those businesses to effectively invest and continue to evolve and adapt in that digital transformation.
And I have to say my own experience has been, I've just been amazed how quickly government, New South Wales government in particular, has adapted to being online. And there was certainly a digital journey going on for quite some time. And that was a real passion in particular under Minister Dominish. But we suddenly went digital. We flipped the switch and we went digital. It was amazing. And the question now is, what will we go back to? And I've heard many senior people say we're never going back to the way it was. The question is, how much of this can we keep? And there's quite a different sensitivity, I guess, to some people who really have embraced online digital and digitization of services, and some folks, I think, who feel a little overexposed by how much we've moved. So I think that the settling will be somewhere a little different for different parts of government, but certainly I hope we've taken a big leap forward.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I want to riff on that a little bit from the context of data transformation and artificial intelligence. And one thing that I find really fascinating about this this crisis that we're in, and comparing it to where we were before, is for some digital transformations or data transformations, particularly in industry, you get a lot of mileage out of announcing something or telling a great story, but not always being able to translate that new capability into something that necessarily moves the needle inside the business. And I think COVID presents a new opportunity from that perspective, because the world is changing so quickly. There's now a genuine need to be able to keep up with the real-time changes that are affecting business. And so I can only imagine that that transformation is going to accelerate, and also accelerate in a really substantive way. So I think it's a huge opportunity for Australia. And it looks like we've got Colin back.
Yes, I'm back. No time like a live stream to have a technical issue, but the wonders of modern technology, I was able to get back into the action pretty quickly, which gave you an opportunity, I can see, to answer some of the questions we had from the panel. Just in the interest of time, I might just go to one further question, if I may, and it's to do with just the thing that Lucinda highlighted right from the get-go, which is that technology is all about people and the impact that we can have on society. And Ben, I loved how you said the critical truth that we have to consider here is that data and AI belongs to all Australians. It's about the people. And Ian, you also highlighted in your speech that it's where you link a lot of data sets together, that you start having the ability for individuals to have their data exposed. And that's why you've spent 4 years putting together the personal information factor to keep people safe. So with all of this technology being leveraged for recovery, we should always remember it's about the people. My question in that is, there's been a lot of talk over many years about the future of work and the impact it will have on people. Do you think over the last 2 months we've actually hit the future of work? Or do you think there's a wave still to come? And I might start with you, Anne.
I think we hit the present of work, and I think that's great. The future of work is something which is going to evolve over time. It's almost certain the remote ability was the focus for the last couple of months. How remote could we still operate? But the use of data-driven insights and artificial intelligence and augmentation is a road we're going to be on for a very long time. So I think we finally hit the present, and I'm excited about it.
Fantastic. Thank you. How about you, Ben?
Well, I think I'm really excited about a particular technology that's been thrown around a lot. And it's one I don't usually get to play with. I usually have to do more serious stuff. But I love mixed reality and virtual reality. And I think it's hit a point recently where it's hit sort of technical maturity, and particularly with devices like Oculus and HoloLens, and in combination with more bandwidth, us being able to push more technology from our homes around, means that I'm really excited to see how much more co-creation, immersive conferencing, data exploration can actually be brought into our environments without us all needing to be in the same room. So I think there's a really exciting future in that mixed reality space as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ben. And Lucinda, your views on the future of work?
Thank you. Yes, I must agree with Ian. I think the future is now in this respect. And what is interesting, I think, is this digital transformation and acceleration has in fact forced us to confront fears that we had about what the future of work or what the future of technology represented, and integrating it so rapidly into our lives and demonstrating to ourselves how we can adapt and how resilient we are as a society it has been remarkable. And I think, for us, that ability to work remotely and to support that, it underlies all of Google's products and tools. The reliability that is necessary to make that future of work operate and to be relied upon has been critically important to us. What's been interesting, I think, as a manager and as a colleague, with colleagues all over the world. I have colleagues in my team in New Zealand and Australia, but work in every meeting with colleagues all around the world, is how technology has demonstrated to us that collaborations and that the innovation that comes through that collaboration has been enabled by technology and not hindered dramatically by our inability to travel and to meet face to face. So I think that those observations are critical to underscore that. I think as human beings, we will always need the face-to-face contact. And so it's about technology enabling us to work the best we can and to find a future of work that serves us as humans and as communities.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much for those insights and for taking the time out for today's CEDA session. CEDA does pride itself on being able to finish on time, and I'm pleased that we're pretty much right on time today. So just a few things to close out. Firstly, my thanks again for our participation, our speakers participating. Thank you to event sponsors GHD Digital. I can advise all our viewers that they can continue to post additional questions, and apologies that we may not have got to your question today, to Pigeonhole for the next 15 minutes or so, and CEDA will post selected responses to your questions in a post-event email. That email will also include a link to the recording of this live stream and speaker presentations that were shared with you today. So you'll have access to that information. A last minute update on the poll. I'm seeing 36% of respondents have said yes, 21% have said not sure, and 43% have said no about, do you believe institutions have trust to use technology and data? So there you go, a little bit more work to do on that front. But I will highlight that CEDA will be back on with a new live stream on the 28th of May, a couple of days away, on supply chains and global trade, where to now. I thank you all for tuning in today.